This is a supported decision-making conference, and what I want to do is kind of give you a little bit of an update of where we're at in our process. We're in the process of trying to get supported decision-making law through the process here in Kansas. And this last summer I worked with Representative Barker from this area, from the Abilene area, and we drafted the bill. And we got it into his committee on the second day. It was assigned to his committee on the second day, and the following week we held a hearing in Fed State, and it passed out of there, and then it went to the House floor, and it passed 101 to 15, which is really good. And then we got it over to the Senate side, and we got it into Senate Judicial Committee, and they held a hearing on it, and we did not get it through the process to get it to the Senate floor. Okay, so it's still setting on the calendar, and it needs to be moved up to general orders so that we can get that heard. At some point today, I'm going to give you a little bit more information on how to contact your senator. And what I would really like you to do, if you really think we need this supported decision-making bill here in Kansas, to go ahead and help us by contacting your senator and letting them know that you want to see that go on to general orders so that we can get it through the process. Okay, so probably the last thing I'll do today was, whenever I talk with you about that, I'll kind of show you how to figure out who your senator is and then how you can communicate with them. So if you do need to leave early, because I know it is Friday afternoon, I still want some kind of a commitment from you that you'll help us get this through, because we need to get it through this year for a variety of reasons. One, it's just the right thing to do. I think it will really benefit families, and that's part of what we'll be doing, is making the case for that today. A couple of things on housekeeping. We will have, we've got cinnamon rolls back here. This door right here will open up over here on this side of the room, and that's where we'll have our lunch. Then the bathrooms are right outside. About, I think, 12:30 today, they're actually going to lock the doors because there's a circus setting up next door. And so if you do need to go outside and go to get something in your car or whatever, you can go out this door on this side of the building, just back around probably where you came in, and you'll see that little ticket booth over there. So whenever you need to get back in, you can go to that ticket booth and somebody will kind of buzz the door so that you can come back in. So that's the only thing I really think is a part of the hassle of this. But other than that, I think this is really good space. Let's see, I think I've covered all the details. I apologize a little bit for getting started late. The reality is there's only a couple staff here, and so we're trying to do a little bit of everything to make this all happen. And with that, Devin, I think I'll go ahead and introduce you, or have you introduce yourself. Come on up here, and we'll get started with the Supported Decision-Making Conference.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
A little problem with the microphone, but we adapted. Thanks to Stephen and Jeff and everybody at KCDD for putting this on. I think supported decision-making is a really important topic to be discussing, so I'm really happy to be a part of this event. And also really appreciate their efforts on the state advocacy for getting the bill as far as it is, and hopefully we can all come together to work on getting the bill passed into the Senate floor soon. So it's very exciting. So they just changed the lights and I can't see everybody as well right now. But I wanted to take a second just to kind of try to understand the room. But so how many people are advocates or self-advocates in the room? Got a few? All right. Family members of people with disabilities? A couple? Okay. And how many are either educators or therapists or other support providers? All right, great. Anybody I left out? Great, well thank you. I just wanted to get an idea of who was in the room. And also, who has heard of supported decision making? Great. About half the room? Okay, that's great. So what I'm going to do for the next hour or so is give you a little more information about what supported decision making is, and also some of the, a little bit of the legal aspects, and also, you know, how do we put this into practice? How do we use supported decision making to better the lives of people with disabilities and involve them more fully in the decision making process? So to begin, I mean, supported decision making is a big word, and but I wanted to kind of relate it a little bit to my life. So Monday is tax day. I'm sure everybody's very excited about. But so does anybody completely do their own taxes with no help from anybody? A couple people? Okay. I need to talk to you later. So for those of you that just raised your hand, do you use software to do it? Okay. And then does anybody have somebody else that helps prepare their taxes or anything like that? Okay. Yeah. That's my situation. Was it working now?
Yes. I thought I had it working.
That's all right. We'll just go with this one.
All right.
So we can think about, so a lot of people are talking about that they have someone that helps prepare their taxes. Some people use technology to help prepare their taxes. And all of these things we can think about as supports that are helping us through that process. I also, I'm not very good with budgeting money, but I'm lucky that my wife is very good at that. So she's the one that'll tell me when I can and can't spend money. Which is very helpful for me, and then she has a good handle on the taxes too. So this is an example of how supported decision making works in my life, that I need support for making financial decisions and, you know, preparing, you know, financial documents, and my wife is the one that really helps me with that, and I'm very happy that she does. But so, you know, that supported decision making is something that we all use in different ways. So for those of you that use, has someone prepare their taxes for you, does that person also help you make medical decisions? I'm not seeing anybody raise their hand. Okay. So the other thing that we're going to talk about is that there's different domains related to decision making. There's different types of decisions that we want to that need to be made. And go on now. Is that better? Okay. Now I can move. Now I can't turn that one off. All right.
On the bottom, a red button. Very small.
Oh, you know what to do? Oh, yeah, that's good to see. Thanks. So the point I'm trying to make is that supported decision making is something that we all do, and that many times there are decisions that we need to make that require a different type of expertise, or that we trust someone different to do. So it doesn't necessarily need to be an all-in-one thing, which is similar to guardianship. So with guardianship, you have a guardian, and that person is responsible for making the decisions in your life. And so it's one person that makes all of the decisions, when it might be the case that we have a need for people with different expertise to help with that. So that's just a quick kind of broad definition of what supported decision making is, and we'll talk a lot more about it now. So we're talking about a lot in Kansas because we're about to pass the law. We're working on passing the law, but I wanted you to know that this is a national resource. This is a national conversation that's going on in a lot of different states. And the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making is a great resource that you can use that's compiling a lot of information about self-advocates that are using supported decision-making, and they're keeping up with a lot of the laws that are being passed in different states and everything, so it's a really good resource. And I should say too that, so I'm up here, I didn't introduce myself besides my trouble with financial decisions. But so my name's Evan Dean. I'm a researcher at the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities. And my colleagues are Carrie Shoburn and Mike Waymeyer, who have done a lot of research related to self-determination, and they're involved in this National Center for Supported Decision Making. And our involvement in this is really thinking about how do we use supported decision making in daily life, and how can we help families and self-advocates use this process in their lives. Before that, a little bit more about me. I've worked in adult services for about 8 years before I went back to school and came to KU. So I've worked with a lot of adults with intellectual disability, mostly around promoting community participation, which involved a lot of decision making and guardianship and self-determination and things like that. This is something that I'm very interested in. So I wanted to provide a couple examples of how supported decision-making looks in the lives of people with disabilities. So I wanted to introduce you to Ryan King, who is a man, he's about 30 now. And when he turned 18, his parents were counseled that they should become his guardian, and so they did. And Ryan is someone who works independently, still with a guardian, makes his own decisions because his parents believe that it's his life, it's him that needs to decide what needs to happen. So he lives at home, has been working independently for 12 years, and makes a lot of his own financial and daily life decisions. When he turned 25, Ryan's parents, who were starting to get older, started looking towards the future and thinking, we have this great setup right now where we're his guardian, but we're supporting him to make the decisions that he needs to make. If something were to happen to us, there's no guarantee that Ryan's next guardian would have that same philosophy or allow Ryan to do those things. So they started petitioning the court to actually remove themselves as guardian and remove guardianship from Ryan. And the court said no, that there's a guardianship in place and that needs to stay. So it took about 5 years of advocating before the court finally said, okay, Ryan can be his own guardian. He doesn't need another guardian. But Ryan's story is a really good example of how even with guardianship, supported decision-making principles can be used, because we're really talking about a mindset. But so Ryan's a good example of how supported decision-making can look in action. Even though he has a guardian, his guardians were supporting him to make the decisions that he needed to make. So as we're talking about supported decision-making, what is it really? So it's defined as the process whereby a person with a disability is enabled to make and communicate decisions with respect to personal or legal matters. So I said this idea of supported decision-making to me is initially about a mindset, that a person with a disability can make decisions in their life if they have the right information and that information is presented in the right way, so they have the right supports. So that's really what we're talking about here. And there's 3 core elements. So that we can recognize the person's right to make decisions on an equal basis with others, so they can make the decisions, and recognize that we can create a decision-making process that does not result in the removal of decision-making rights. And we'll talk more about that process as we go along here. And then we recognize that people will often need assistance in decision-making through various means, just like we all do. I'll tell you a story about another woman named Jenny Hatch, who really became the face of supported decision-making. So Jenny was actually her own guardian for most of her life until she was about 25. So she lived independently, worked a job, had friends that she hung out with afterward, just lived a life like everyone else lives. Until one day she was riding her bike to work and got hit by a car. So Jenny had to spend some time in the hospital after that. And when she was released from the hospital, she still needed a significant amount of support just to get around after all of the injuries that she had had. And so during that process, she needed support to live independently. And during that process, her family actually petitioned to become her guardian. And Jenny didn't have the greatest relationship with her parents and certainly didn't want them to be the guardian. But they were concerned that she couldn't live on her own anymore, and Jenny was adamant that she wanted to live on her own. So her parents took over guardianship and asked her to move into a group home. So Jenny, went from living independently, seeing her friends all the time, to living in a group home where she didn't want to live around other people, and also it restricted her access to her friends and her job. So she was no longer able to keep the job that she had been working in the community, but instead started working at a sheltered workshop in the area that was also run by the same agency as the group home. And she hated it. She hated all of it. She ran away several times and had to be brought back. And finally, someone said to her, have you thought about supported decision-making as an option, as an alternative to guardianship? And so she was all about that, and it took, she found legal representation, appealed to the court to become her own decision maker, and it took over a year of advocacy through her lawyer until she wasn't actually able to remove the guardianship, but she was able to, her friends who she worked with, and then they had known each other for a long time, actually, the court actually assigned them to be the guardianship with the stipulation that they used a supported decision-making framework to support her. So Jenny was back. She actually moved in with her friends, and they took care of her until she was able to get back on her feet. But it's a really good example of how guardianship really, so to contrast with Ryan, in Jenny's case, guardianship really limited her ability to make decisions, which is what Ryan's parents were really fearful of for him later on. And so supported decision-making became an alternative to guardianship, where Jenny could get back control over her life. And so Jenny has written a lot about this and talked a lot about this, and I'll just read a couple of the quotes that she said. "A guardian should help me reach my goals. Instead, I was kept away from my friends, my job, my church, and my community. I lost a year of my life being forced to stay in group homes and forced to work at a job I did not want." How do we make sure that a person's rights are not taken away like my rights were? Who will make sure that no one has to go through what I went through? Who will make sure that people do the right thing? Just because a person has a disability does not mean they need a guardian. Many times they just need support and a little help. So those are words from Jenny. So we're talking about supported decision-making as an alternative to guardianship. And so the bill that we're working on passing in Kansas actually makes the supported decision-making process a legal alternative. And I'll show you what some of the forms can look like and how that can look. But so it is possible, thinking about supported decision-making as a mindset, to have a guardian and still use a supported decision-making process. But it's not a guarantee. So supported decision-making as a legal process guarantees the person the right to make their own decisions. So that's the differentiation that we're looking at. So at the heart of all this is really thinking about self-determination. When we talk about self-determination, we really mean the person being the primary driver of their life. So they're setting goals, they're problem solving, they're making decisions, all in support of moving their life in the direction that they want to live. So we'll talk a little bit now about the legal and practice aspects of supported decision making. And so we'll kind of differentiate what it is and what it is not. So supported decision making is not a program. It's not something that we go and do. We don't go do supported decision making and then we're done. And it's also not only a legal option or arrangement. As I said, you can be a guardian, you can have a guardian and still be supported to make your decisions. So what it is a very individualized process. So it starts with the person. That ranges in intensity based on the person's support need. And it can be formal or informal and should be directed by the person based on their interests and preferences. So if you kind of think about it, that's how it looks for all of us. Some people need more or less intensity of support related to taxes. Some people just need the right software. Some people need someone else helping them use that software. So Texas was the first state to pass a supported decision-making law. And I believe Kansas law is, that we're working on passing is related to this and similar. It's not exactly the same. But what the Texas law says is that instead of guardianship being instead of you either have a guardian or you don't, that before guardianship is considered, you have to consider other forms of support, including supported decision-making, representative payee for financial support, a power of attorney, trusts and savings accounts, and person-centered planning. That a person actually has to document that these things have been tried and how they've been tried before the court will agree that guardianship is needed. So in Texas, we start with supported decision making and build out from there as the person needs, instead of just going instantly to guardianship. So the great thing about having this as a law and as a alternative to guardianship is that supported decision-making actually becomes legally enforceable. And it authorizes specific people who are going to be the supporters, and I'll show you what the form looks like, and that it can be changed by the person with a disability. So one of the big concerns that people have that will sometimes drive the decision to become a guardian is, what if the person has a medical event? Or what if we need access to educational information or whatever it is? So if a person's their own guardian, they're the ones that have access to their medical information. So if I'm trying to help them make a decision, I can't get access to that and have to rely, and so they may or may not be able to, I may or may not be able to talk to the doctor on behalf of the person. So with a supported decision-making agreement, it actually authorizes a person. So the first part is defining a person. And so some of the interesting things about this are that it authorizes specific areas where this person can support my decisions. So, if I have an accountant that's helping me with my taxes, I can say that they're helping me manage my money, but they don't have to help manage my health decisions or my services decisions. So you can designate people to just specific domains of decisions that need to be made. There's also a statement of the supporter's role. So it says, my supporter does not make decisions for me. To help me make decisions, my supporter can do three things. Help me get the information that I need to make medical or other financial or other decisions. I can't read it very well up there, let me see. Help me understand my choices so I can make the best decision for me. And three, help me communicate my decision to the right people. So I make the decision, and the people that are supporting me can help me obtain the information I need, help explain the information in an accessible way, and help me communicate that decision to the people, help me communicate my decision to the people who need to know it. And then the other important thing is that there's a date on this. So the person can revisit whether or not they want to continue having the same people supporting the different aspects. So while we're talking about the legal stuff, does anybody have any questions about the legal aspects? Yeah.
How different is this from power of attorney? Because I know power of attorneys, you can stipulate just certain things that a child needs. You don't have to do everything.
That's a good question, and I'm not going to claim to be an expert on power of attorney. So the question was, how does this differ from power of attorney? My understanding is that power of attorney was mostly related to medical decisions. That's not the case?
No, educational, financial, and medical.
Okay. Steve might be a better one to field that question.
Okay, can you repeat the question, please?
What's the difference between this and power of attorney? Because power of attorney, you can customize it.
Yes, and you can have several different kinds of powers of attorney. So the difference is the power of attorney is giving someone else the ability to make a decision for you. This is in this you retain the power to make a decision. You're not giving that away. So that's the main difference between this and a power of attorney. A power of attorney is actually giving the authority to make a decision to someone else through the power of attorney. Now you can withdraw it at any time too, because you retain capacity. And so actually what this is just another tool. And so if you look at the list of tools, you've got guardianship, you've got powers of attorney, you've got several other things that you can use. This is just a really simple tool that if we get it passed in the legislature, this will be recognized. And so this doesn't cost anything, and you don't need an attorney to do it. And so it's a lot better for families, and it really leaves the person who's making the decision empowered to make their decisions. And so that's the primary difference. And I'll probably talk a little bit more about it at 3 o'clock whenever I'm doing my presentation too, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other tools as well. Yes?
Does this need to be notarized?
The way that we have it right now, and again, it still has to go through the last part of the legislative process, in order to make this binding, you can either have it notarized or you can have it signed in front of 2 witnesses. And then in order to get back out of it, you simply have to put in writing that you want back out of the supported decision-making agreement. You don't have to get that notarized, you don't have to have witnesses or anything. And so that way, it's really easy to get into and it's really easy to get out of.
Thanks. Yes?
Not necessarily specific to this form, but how about for minors? Are they represented at all? Would the law protect them if they, like for me as a parent, if something were to happen to me and I wanted to include that in my trust or the planning for whoever might assist with raising a child, would they be protected also as a minor?
So let me be sure I understand. You're saying for someone who's under 18, can I put this process in place for when they turn 18 in case I'm not around?
Right. Would it be more just like a letter?
Yeah, again, it's whenever that person turns 18, what we're doing is we're respecting their right to make a decision, and it would be their decision, not yours.
Yes.
Okay, so, but you might want to encourage your child to, that whenever they turn 18 and they need assistance, that you really would like them to consider supported decision-making. But again, at the time they turn 18, they have the capacity to make those decisions themselves.
Very good, thank you.
And to me, that also speaks to the importance of having a supported decision-making laws, that's where we start. So if something were to happen to you, the person wouldn't automatically go into guardianship under someone else. The supported decision-making process would still be the first consideration.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, sorry, another question.
Once it's filled out, who do you file it with, so it becomes the
Who do you file it with?
Yeah, because I know, like, when you become a guardian, it's filed through the courts, so it becomes legally binding. But how do if I am a person who is supporting someone, and I now have authority to look at their medical records, how will I get that out there so they know I can look at their medical records or their financial statements?
Yeah, again, what we have in the law is the form is actually going to be created by the Judicial Advisory Committee. And so the form doesn't exist at this point. We have some drafts that we're going to share with them. But primarily what that would be is if you're the individual that's being supported, and so you're the principal in this case, and you want your supporter to be able to get access to your medical records or your bank records or any of that, you simply need to share that with whoever it is you're wanting to share the records. So there's no place to file this. There isn't any place that this exists. And so then if you say, I really need help with financial stuff, and so my supporter has access to my bank records and can help me make investment decisions, those kinds of things, they're just advising me. They don't have the ability to move money or do anything like that. So that's not what you're given whenever you're given this. You're only given the ability to access information so you can advise the person. And so there really isn't anything, as we were talking about through the legislative process, people were concerned that this might have some risk, or put people at risk. But really, if somebody's going to do something bad, they probably don't want a record that they signed up to help someone and then they're going to do something bad in that process. So we really think this offers more protections than what we currently have.
Next thing that I want to talk about is, okay, so when this becomes law, because it's going to, because we're all going to advocate for it, and it's a great thing. How do we put this in place? How does a family and a self-advocate go about deciding what supports need to be in place and figuring out how to support people? And that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about now. So to me, the balancing act that we're doing here with people is really trying to balance the person's decision-making autonomy with the right amount of support that they need to make the decision. So too much support and they're not actually making the decision, but too much autonomy, they may either not have all the information that they need, or they may not have the supports that they need to really think through and make an educated decision. So that's really the thing that we're trying to balance with supported decision-making. So in practice, there are a few things that it's critical to understand. One is the decision-making abilities of the person, the environmental demands in terms of the accessibility of the information that's being presented, the risk of the decision, the complexity of the decision, the relationships with the providers, and the opportunities that the person has for decision-making. So there's a big difference between between going to college and buying a book or something like that. So one costs a lot more money. Think about medical decisions. There's going to a routine appointment versus having surgery. There's a much different level of risk involved. There's a much different level of information that needs to be gathered to make that decision. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the environmental demands. And then also the supports that a person needs to make the decision. So really looking at their communication and problem-solving skills, their advocacy skills, the social networks, the people that they have around them, and the decision-making aids that are available to the person. And again, I think, thinking about the communication and the skills that are involved here, a lot of our research has shown that having the opportunity to make those decisions and be supported in making decisions or solving problems actually increases the skill. So we're not looking at skill as a fixed thing, but it's something that we always need to continually be assessing and understanding. So what is decision making really? So we're talking about making choices among courses of action, judging which solution is the best at that time. And we can kind of break it down into a multiple step process. All the way from identifying possible courses of action, identifying the sequences of each action, assessing the possibility of a consequence occurring, choosing the best alternative. So if you're presented with the option of needing to have surgery, we'll say. So what are the different courses of action? You could not have surgery. Maybe there's some medication you can take that would allow you not to have surgery. You could have the surgery. Maybe there's a couple of different types of procedures that have different outcomes or side effects. So those are all of the possible courses of action. So then the next step would be understanding the consequences of each action. Does the medication have side effects? Is it really expensive? If I have the surgery, how long would I be in bed? Would I lose a lot of my strength? All of those kinds of things are things that need to be weighed in these decisions. We need to have all of the information needed, and that information needs to be presented in a way that is accessible. And so then that decision-making continuum continues on to choosing the best alternative and then implementing the decision. So a person, any of us, may need different types of supports for each phase of this. And that's one of the things that we need to understand is that there are a lot of different steps that we're taking in the decision-making process. Where does the person need support, and what type of support does the person need throughout the continuum? And then again, we can think about the environmental demands for decision making. There are different domains for decision making, as we've talked about, related to health, financial decisions, legal decisions, decisions with relationships, and community living. Each of these, so health and financial decisions can be pretty complex, and complex in a different way than relationship decisions can be made. So there's different types of supports that are needed for each one of these, and different people in our lives that we probably trust to help us make these decisions. Again, the key factors in determining that are related to the amount of support that a person may need are the risk in the decision, the complexity of the decision, and the opportunity the person has to make decisions. So related to understanding a person's support needs, I want to back up for a second and talk about what we call the social ecological model of disability. And really what this is talking about is we can think in terms of like a previous to this type of model, people with disabilities have kind of been seen, and in some places still are seen, as incompetent, or we can talk about their personal incompetence. The person cannot do this, the person cannot do that, the person cannot make decisions, so someone has to make their decisions for them. But really what the social ecological model says is that a person has skills and abilities, goals, things like that, and they're operating within an environment that places demands on the person. When the person and their skill is in an environment when there's a match, the person can function and function fully. So the disability kind of goes away. When there's a mismatch there, when a person is being required to make decisions that are really complex or really risky without on their own, there can be a mismatch between the person and what they're trying to do. And when that's the case, we say that there's a need for support. So, whether it's obtaining information or, breaking down into understanding the consequences, if there's a need for support, the person can still make the decision, the person is competent, the person can do what it is they need to do with the right amount of support. So from a supports model perspective, we can look at, again, that mismatch between the competency and the demands, which creates a need for support and an individualized system of support. And so the supports can lead to improved personal outcomes. So when we think about planning for an individualized system of support, I know later people are going to be talking about the Charting the Life course model, which is an example of a way of really thinking through what that system of supports for a person might look like, and is a useful tool in this. So we think about assessment for support need, again, person-centered planning, so we can go back to thinking about Charting the Life course as a person-centered planning process with the person and their desired life in the middle, and thinking about the supports that they have access to and maybe the supports that they need to build in to live the life that they want to live. So we think about that. We can also think about support needs assessment. And what support needs assessment does is assumes that a person can do what it is that they want to do. They can work, they can live independently if they want to, they can go to school if they want to, any of those things. We assume that a person can do those. And then we ask the question, what types of supports does a person need to make that happen? In terms of the frequency and duration of supports and also the type of support. So, does a person need some type of technology in order to make it happen? Or do they need a person helping or, whatever that support may be? And then the other thing that I'll talk a little bit about that my colleagues, Carrie Sjogren and Mike Waymeyer, have been developing is a supported decision-making inventory system to really think through the decisions that need to be made and the capacity that the person has to make that and where they might need supports. So this is an example of what the supported decision-making inventory system looks like. So I'll just kind of walk through it because I know it's hard to read, but it goes from, in section 1, thinking about personal factors in terms of, so this is talking about feelings. I feel like I am free to decide for myself how to live my life. And people in my life take care of me. So we're trying to get an idea of the person's feelings around their decision-making capacity. Section 2 goes into the environmental demands, which we've talked about. So question 1 is talking about related to health. To what degree are there high risks associated with the decisions that need to be made? And to what degree are there opportunities available for me to make those decisions? And then section 3 goes into an autonomy inventory to think about questions like, I understand why a decision needs to be made, and the level of support that a person thinks that they may need. And I know what decisions need to be made. So we can use this information to really think about the demands and the risk of the decisions that need to be made and the capacity that a person has and the feelings they have around that to kind of organize their supports around the decision making. So we can also think through, how can we support a person to make a decision that they need to be made. So we've developed a 3-phase model to kind of think through this. We use this a lot in education and related to employment to help people set and achieve goals. And so we've adapted that to think about it specifically with decision making. So in phase one, we really want to support the person to identify the decision that needs to be made. And then phase two, to create and enact an action plan to make that decision. So related to phase one, we're thinking about the decision that needs to be made. We're thinking about what are the person's goals, what are the person's long-term goals, and how does this decision fit into that? What are their strengths related to making the decision, and where do they think that they might need support for making the decision? In phase two, we're really thinking about what are the barriers to them making the decision. And from the person's perspective, how can we enact a plan that's going to address the barriers that are making the decision? So if the decision is medically based, how am I going to get the information that I need to make that decision? Maybe they need support researching it on the internet. Maybe they need support talking to their doctor or whatever it is. How are they going to get that information? And then three, after you enact that plan, there's a self-reflection phase to think through, okay, someone help me get the information from the internet, someone help me talk to the doctor. Do I have what I need to make the decision? Or maybe I need that broken down more, or maybe there's another decision that I need to make that I need to focus on now. So that's kind of the process that we use overall to help someone think through a decision-making process. And again, back related to the social ecological model, we can think about using that in different environments also related to health or community living. So this is where we might use, so a lot of my research and a lot of my work is related to employment. So we really think through, we use the model that I showed to really think through what is the person's need for support, what are their employment goals, what are their strengths related to that, and thinking about the environment where they're going to be working. So as a quick example, we worked with someone who wanted to become a nail technician. So this is a person that was supported by an agency that supports adults with intellectual disability. She wanted to become a nail technician and go to cosmetology school to do that. So I didn't know much about cosmetology school, so we had to find out. And it turns out there's a lot of anatomy and physiology involved with that, a lot of chemistry that you need to know, and there's an entrance exam. So I think from her perspective, it was more about doing nails, but she wanted to think about this. So then our process became for her to get into school. What supports does she need to pass this test? So we got a practice exam to kind of work through. So all of this is helping her make the decision on whether or not to go to cosmetology school. So we start working through the test, and what she realizes as she's working through that she hasn't had a lot of this information. She didn't get a lot of anatomy and physiology in school, and she could learn it, but it was going to take her way too long to learn, and she wanted to think about a job now. So, but it allowed us, and that's kind of reflecting on that, we could ask questions about, okay, why did you really want to become a nail technician? And for her, it was really about that one-on-one interaction. The times where she was in her day program, when they were doing each other's nails, was really her only opportunity during the week to have one-on-one interaction with people, and that's what she really valued. So thinking about it from a social ecological model, we can think about, in terms of different environments, to get that one-on-one connection. Cosmetology school was one way to do that, but the demands that placed on her were too high at that time for her to think about. But since it's the one-on-one connection now that we're really talking about, there are lots of environments and lots of jobs that are supportive of that. So we actually started looking at, she ended up getting a job as a receptionist in an office building. So she had a lot of one-on-one contact, didn't need all of the scientific knowledge that she needed for the school, but she was able to use her strengths related to interacting with people and her interests in that area to work a satisfying job. So again, when we talk about support needs, we're really talking about the resources and strategies that people use to participate in their daily life. I'm going to skip over a little bit of that. But we're really thinking about how can we support people to engage in their community. So when we think about supports, we can think about maybe the person needs education or needs to develop a skill, but maybe it is something related to technology that a person might need, or it may be another person asking questions or helping them, kind of coach them through the decisions that need to be made. All of those we're considering as supports to support a person. And so then, we're kind of closing in. I wanted to just show a couple other forums that also don't show up very well here, but different supported decision making is also is a big conversation in the medical field for all of us. How can doctors relay information in a way that is accessible to people that don't have a medical degree in a way that they can make decisions? So this website right here is actually from the Mayo Clinic. They have a shared decision-making national resource center. And they kind of go through, like, how do we break down, if we're thinking about weight changes or testing blood sugar, how can we make that process really understandable to everybody? So just kind of as a parallel, as we're thinking about legal aspects, places like the Mayo Clinic are also thinking about, how do we put the supports in place for people to actually carry out a supported decision-making process. And so I'm going to skip through that. So really, I encourage you, as you're trying to find out more information about this, to visit the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making. There's a lot of great videos out there and a lot of great tools. This is a very new thing for a lot of us, and we're still trying to, if you come to my session after this, we're going to kind of work through a process that we're developing to help families kind of think through the supports and self-advocates, the supports that need to be in place for a supported decision-making process. But with that, does anybody have any questions about anything you've heard? Yeah.
So, if there are forced issues, I mean, you don't have to be a guardianship if you want to. So what's the difference between somebody who decides, what we're going to do with guardianship between the family, we're going to give you the support you need, or if you need to go out and get information when you're deciding on a certain decision, we'll just do it at home without having to have anything signed legally.
Right. Yeah, so the question was, why do we need a supported decision-making process? If we, if we know the person can make decisions, why can't we just do that within the context of our family and friends? And why do we need, this legal thing, right? Is that, yeah. And that's a really good question. And that, I'd go back to that story about Jenny Hatch, who, that was very much her situation where she didn't have a guardian. I think and I think, a lot of self-advocates today, that's how they've been supported to make decisions without having a guardian. I think the thing that we need to be careful about, and the thing that we're kind of worried about is if the family's not there, or if something were to happen, would guardianship ever be imposed on the person without their will? So the supported decision-making gives an option to that, to not have that happen for people. Would you say anything else about that, Steve?
Yeah, do I have this on? Is this on at all?
No.
Yes. 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 Test. I got it. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to address a couple of things around that issue. Right now, if you go to the, whenever we were doing research on this, we were trying to find out how many guardianships there were and that sort of thing. We really couldn't find much information on that. What we were able to find is, there we go. Just for what it's worth, Jeff and I played with the lights last night for quite a while. We couldn't figure out which ones were the right ones to hit. If we turned on the lights, it wipes out the screen up here. And so we were really trying to figure it out last night. We thought we had it figured out. And then we come in today and it's still not
I
working.
think everybody stayed awake though, so that's good.
Yeah, I do think that did happen. Anyway, what happens is about 67% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have a guardian that participated in one of the surveys, the National Core Indicators surveys. And if you compare that with the national average, it's only about 35%. So we are doing guardianship about twice as many guardianships in Kansas as what's the national average. And that's one of the things that gives us some concerns that we need something else. And primarily when people are getting guardianships is whenever they're turning 18, because the school systems are informing folks about guardianship, and they don't know a lot about it. The schools don't know a lot about it, parents don't know a lot about it, but whenever your school's telling you, well, you ought to be considering guardianship, then families are going, well, a professional's telling me I ought to be considering guardianship, so maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. And so what we're really thinking is if we can do an alternative to guardianship and really make supported decision-making well-known. And we are working with Department of Ed right now as we're working through this. We're hoping to get the piece of legislation through, and that'll help us as we work with the schools to give other options for families.
Hey, we're in it.
Did you have a question?
No, well, I was just saying, we work for the school system, and the problem I have is when we tell the families to get guardianship, their biggest thing is they don't have the money to get it. So I think this is
Yeah, that's $2,500, $3,500, $4,000. I mean, it's a fairly expensive issue. And this gives the families still the right and the opportunity to stay involved. And it doesn't cost anything. In some states that have worked on this, there are attorneys that will charge you $500 to do the form, but you don't need that. You can do it yourself. But some people feel more comfortable having an attorney involved, and so if you want that option, you can. I was thought of one other thing with that. Oh yeah, the District of Columbia, they changed to supported decision-making as their first alternative that they tell families about in the schools up there, and they've seen a 10% reduction in guardianships in the district. So it is working, and so part of the thing is we've got to get the education out to the educators as they work with families as we work on that. Thank you.
Well, I was just going to say, somebody who had asked the difference between having this and just having an agreement is that if you have something like this that gives you legal access, because otherwise you can't just call the bank. And because as a case manager, I run into that all the time. If the paperwork's not filled out, I have absolutely no access to the information. And without the information, you can't help but make a decision.
Very good point.
Well, with the IEPs, you have the question with the guardianship, if you added another option, is that it's like the decision-making is another option, so then you can tell them, so you talk to what kids.
Yeah, I really think that's the key piece to this is whenever we get the legislation through, it'll help us do the education piece then, so we can educate all the folks that are involved in that. Whenever we were trying to work on this originally, the banking industry came up and said, hey, we got a problem with this. So we talked with the banking industry about it, and then they were going, no, wait, we're okay. We thought it through and we're okay.
So there are certain agencies who will only take releases from their agency, like Social Security, the clearinghouse. So how are you guys gonna work that with this document?
What, or you want me to take that?
That's probably a better one for you.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wanted the piece of legislation, because we can go back and in the legislation, we can say that this document is an acceptable document, and then the banking industry and the medical community and the schools will need to respond to that as it's okay. And you still will have some folks that believe that their documents are the best documents, and I don't know that we'll be able to overcome that, but we do plan on doing, once we get this all done, we will do a lot of training. And I will tell you, and I don't know if you know this, Evan, but the folks up in Alaska that passed this legislation, they went to do the training for all the judges in the state, and they thought they were bombing. They were having such a hard time. You know, they just thought that they were totally not paying attention to them, not doing anything. But if you think about what a judge doesn't show any emotion, and they don't respond to things. And at the end of the presentation, they came up and they said, "That's the best training we've ever been to in our lives." And so that's a kind of a pre-warning as we're working through this process. We've got to watch our crowds and make sure that that sometimes people don't respond real well as the crowd too. So I think there was another question back here.
I was just going to ask how the court side has responded to your introduction of this. So you kind of answered that.
Okay, yeah, the courts follow the laws. And so if we get a law, the courts will follow that, and we will need to educate them on that. And the other thing I would say about that is most of the major organizations like the Guardianship National Association supports this. The trial lawyers support this. As you go through this whole process, there's a lot of support in the communities for this stuff.
So my question is how do we financially support this process? I mean, these support systems are going to cost something, and not all clients have the same financial access as the support systems. So how does this go into place without becoming a class system offered program? Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so like when you talk about technology, sometimes we need extra technology. Some clients don't have access to funds to provide for those resources. So where is there a protection in place that, like, if you put this in as a requirement, how would you protect clients who didn't have resources? How would they get equal opportunity to this? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, and so technology is an example of a support, but you can put this process in place. So I think a big, with the person-centered planning plan, to kind of support this, to really think about what supports does a person have access to as a place to start. So you can have a supported decision-making process without technology or without an accountant or any of that. But so thinking about what is available to the person, and then also, if technology is needed, then how can we figure out how to get access to it? Just as a process, there are no financial means to being able to fill out the form. But getting access, that's an issue now, and that's gonna still be an issue, access to technology. So, Stephanie?
Actually, it's Skylar, and we want to both respond to that.
Great.
Hang on.
Am I encouraged?
We're going to use Skylar, let's show them what it costs. Zero. It costs no money to do this. Absolutely no money at all. I would ask you how you fund your supported decision-making plan, which you have in your own life. I have mine, and it costs nothing.
Well, I'm not talking about the plan itself. I'm talking about the resources that are needed sometimes.
You know what? That's a struggle, no matter whether you have supported decision-making, whether you have guardianship, whether you have power of attorney or anything. Those issues have literally nothing to do with how you make your decisions in your life. Getting access to that would be increasing your access to resources and going to places that will help you find those resources, which are all around in this room. And there's also a statewide organization, Self-Advocate Coalition in Kansas, that would be happy to help you find places to get those resources.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody had the access to being able to have.
Every single person, you know what, and that's what SAC is fighting for. Every single person who's born with a disability has a right to try this.
Yeah.
I don't care how they communicate. I don't care what their level of intelligence is perceived at being. You want to talk pro-life, every single person who is born has a right to this.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that that was not, people that had lower income weren't being funneled more towards guardianship or something.
That will,
That's
you
what I-
find that happening and you come get me.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that didn't happen.
No.
I work with my job, I work with people with different severities of disability, and sometimes, the schools are really pushing for guardianship.
Yeah,
so
and I've
when-
seen that too.
And it's, some people with the severity of the disability, it might be the best thing to have that guardianship, but working with the guardian to teach them that this person still has rights, and telling them, hey, here's all the person's rights, they have the same rights as you and I. Your job is just basically to make sure no one's going to take advantage of that individual. And working alongside them and not talking for them, but helping them communicate with other people. So that person, has help getting their point across. It's kind of like I was using the banking thing for, first time I talked. And basically I have that person with me so they can see how to communicate a little bit. Because eventually, like with my agency, we're funded through grants. If our grants are gone, my agency's gone. Where does that support leave that person?
Yeah.
So teaching them, educating that person, because everybody needs some additional support throughout their life. And so basically, encouraging parents or guardians to let that person still make choices is important.
Yeah, Jean will be doing some more training on guardianship, and our Kansas guardianship law is actually pretty well written, and it talks about it should be the last resort, and you should really make sure that you've tried everything else. We're just wanting to make sure that supported decision-making is on the table so that people can try that before. And if it really was just because folks that make bad decisions end up as guardians, yeah, we should all have guardians. So, yeah, I don't know about you, at 18, I wasn't making all the best decisions in my life, and I probably wasn't doing even that well at 22. I won't tell you my age now, but I still don't always make good decisions. But I really don't think a guardian is necessary either for that.
It's part of life, that's how you learn.
Yeah, I did learn from those. Everybody in here that's made a bad decision, can you think about it for just a second? Okay, early on bad decisions and stuff. You know what happens whenever I ask that question? Most people smile. Because that bad decision really was kind of fun, but you did learn from it too. Okay. Other questions or comments?
I work for the guardianship program, and so we train and support guardians, volunteer guardians. So guardianship really is about making legal decisions. It's not helping people make behavior changes. So that's, I think, a real significant difference is that this is really about making legal decisions or being a substitute decision maker for somebody, not to change their behavior necessarily.
Yeah, good point. Whenever we were holding the hearings on this and people were coming up and doing testimony, we had a lot of families that came up and did testimony about the fact that they wanted their son or daughter to be learning how to make decisions, and that was the whole point. And the schools would be telling them they needed guardianship, and so there were several families came up and testified that we really need this other option because the schools aren't understanding that there should be other options, and so this will really help give families that other option. And sometimes guardianship is appropriate, but I really think we should be trying other things before we do that, because that's really taking away people's rights.
Related to that too, like there is some experience, like our decision-making capacity increases with the more decisions we make, and the more we learn from those decisions. So this isn't a process that starts at 18 because it's a legal thing. Like I think families and schools and so I'm an occupational therapist, OTs, like this is something that knowing that somebody's going to turn 18 and be making decisions, like we need to be preparing them by helping them make decisions as they go along to develop the capacity for it.
Hi, so we are a school psychologist and 2 school social workers. And I guess our question is, what are what are our alternatives? Because, we've got multiple kids. Like honestly, I work in one rural district and I've got 2 18-year-olds who don't have families, and the schools have basically raised them. And now they're going out on their own and trying to find somebody to be a guardian is difficult. And in Salina, we've got one family that I can think of that they can't afford guardianship at all. I mean, I've gone down every road to try to find away for them because their child had medical issues the last bit. He gets hospitalized and they can't get any information because they don't have guardianship over him. But if this isn't legal, what are options besides guardianship?
Do you know who your senator is?
Yes.
You need to have a conversation with him, tell him to get this pushed through so that we have this
I
option.
can, but what do we do today? Our kids are graduating in 6 weeks.
Yeah, whenever I was working with Adult Protective Services and we were talking about doing supported decision-making, they were talking a lot about the issues of people that self-neglect, and then they can't find folks to be guardians for them because people just don't want to take on that responsibility. And we were thinking that if we got supported decision-making in place, we may have options where you just go to the neighbor and say, would you just make sure that your neighbor's eating on a regular basis? And maybe we could do a supported decision-making agreement on that, because a lot of times people don't want to take on the guardianship because they don't want the liability.
Yeah, well aware.
And so this,
I've had it happen 3 times this year.
Are you here in this Saline County?
Some of my kids are, some are not.
Because the ones that are getting ready to graduate, you might want to reach out to OCCK, see about getting a case manager.
Yes, they signed them out of one kid with beating him for 10 minutes.
And
And the CDDO would be your first step.
They also said he was completely fine on his own with a 50 IQ, so. I mean, we do have, our system is failing a lot of these kids, it just is. We're part of that system too, I'm not saying we're not, but. I'm done, unless you want me to say something else.
okay, actually, I think your voice was carrying okay. I just want to make sure that we're getting the.
No one's ever accused me of being soft-spoken.
Other thoughts or questions?
I have one, on your DPOA, it doesn't go into effect until somebody cannot make a decision. So it has, this is something completely different. As long as they can make their own decisions, they're fine, and your DPOA means nothing.
Yes, that's correct. This is something different than the
This is
doable
much
project.
better in the sense because these people are still verbally function, or have a clear thought.
Yeah, and as we were working on this, we really, even though we're coming at it from the disability perspective, because we're the Kansas Council on Developmental Disabilities, we really believe this is going to be used a lot in the aging population. Probably every one of us in here will consider it at some point in time, that we need help with some of the decision processes that we're going through, either through the medical needs or financial needs as our capacity just diminishes.
So I work for Area Agency on Aging, and the power of attorney, some of them read, take effect immediately upon signing, and so that is the problem with the senior population, is they don't want to sign them because they don't want to give away their rights, because that's what it reads. So I just wanted to clarify that, and because a lot of times family members take it upon themselves to say, well, I have power of attorney, so I'm going to make this decision without consulting with the senior, and I don't care if the senior's 95, if they can make a decision, they can make a decision. So I think this is great.
Well, whoever put that in is obviously not considering the people themselves.
Correct.
Yeah, I think there's various versions of that, so.
That's kind of like a shim-sham type thing of taking away rights.
Other thoughts or comments? Okay, how about a round of applause for